Hi everyone, this is Grace, and today we are going to learn how to make this fun neon Hello Summer set. Can't wait to dive in, so let's start with a good old standby, the watermelon. For this set, I'm doing mostly actually a 2 consistency outline and flood. For this though, I rolled with just a 1 because this is a really easy, simple shape. And I'm using this bright pink, super fun pink here. I'm a fan of the Wilton pink. I actually find with my lemon royal icing recipe that a lot of the pinks, especially AmeriColor, seem to react funny to the, I guess it's the acid in the lemon juice, and my pinks just don't look good. They're always very grainy. No matter how much food coloring I use, it's still this terrible graininess. So I love Wilton pink, but other people have success with lots of other pinks, but I'm a big fan of Wilton pink. So what I did just there was I painted with some pure gel food coloring, that Wilton pink, with a fan brush that was not diluted at all. And then I'm using somewhere between like a soft and a medium peak here to just very simply pipe these additional details. I love using this shape for watermelon. It's this classic kind of rounded triangle shape by Sweet Sugar Belle. I have it both in small and big. You can also use it for candy corn and lots of other things. Here I am painting with, again, pure gel food coloring, black. Kind of wish that I had used edible paint instead. I think this was earlier on when I wasn't really aware of the beauty of edible paint. I link a couple in my Amazon shop, and I'll try to link one in the description of the video. I just find that they dry better. Gel food coloring, there's the watermelon, tends to dry sticky. But you'll see later on I do something to try to counteract that stickiness. So here I am. This is the popsicle that I'm moving on to next. Or you could say ice cream. I don't know. Is it popsicle? Is it ice cream? Doesn't matter. It's cute. So the stick portion of the popsicle, I'm doing a 1 consistency outline and flood. This is a pretty thick flood. Like, that is a thick flood. I can tell that because I really needed that scribe to help it settle. And you can see I've already outlined the popsicle with piping consistency. Here I am again using pure gel food coloring. This is chocolate brown and my handy dandy fan brush. This was back in the day when I never filmed myself outlining the shapes when I was doing 2 consistency outline and flood, because I just thought no one cared about seeing the outline done. But here we are. So I'm doing this 2 consistency outline and flood. To be honest though, the thickness of my flood here, definitely I could have just done 1 consistency. Now, this was at a period in my decorating lifetime, career, whatever you want to call it, that I just wasn't really comfortable with a 2 consistency outline and flooding it all the way to the edge. So I still very much relied on using piping consistency to do that outline first to get a nice sharp shape, excuse me. Here, that white has crusted over, and I'm using a pretty thick flood for this drip. Some people like to do drips like I'm doing here, where it's like a 3D drip on top of the surface. Some people prefer to not use too much icing and instead will actually do like a cutout, if that makes sense. So it's 1 layer of icing instead of 2. But I like to live on the edge here with my extra icing. So that is my popsicle ice cream question mark. And up next we have this pineapple. This cutter is actually pretty large. Yeah, it's a large pineapple. So, like I mentioned, I already outlined with a piping consistency. It doesn't really matter if it's like a soft or a medium. Absolutely no need for a stiff peak piping consistency in this set though, so just keep that in mind. Yeah, I was using a pretty thick flood. Like, I didn't need to do 2 consistency here, but people ask me all the time, what's the difference between doing 1 and 2, and why do 2 if one works just fine? And I'd say that a lot of it's personal preference. What are you comfortable doing? This is, again, pure gel food coloring. Actually, it's possible I thin this ever so slightly with water, but love that fan brush. Back to the 1 versus 2 consistency. So I really think it's just personal. It's 2 things. It's personal preference. What are you comfortable with? Some, like expert cookiers I know, some swear by 1 consistency and some swear by 2. It's just what you prefer. Now for me, I'm comfortable doing both. I will intentionally do a 2 consistency if I'm doing something with a lot of wet on wet, because it's just easier with a thinner consistency, or I'm doing like the same shape for a huge quantity and it is faster to flood with a thinner consistency. I'm just cringing looking at how thick my flood was. Oh, this is a large surface for such a thick flood. I'm exclaiming it's a large surface for such a thick flood because the flood consistency does crust. And if you're working with too thick of a flood, too big of a surface, it will crust by the time you're done flooding, and then you don't have this beautiful, perfect, flat surface. So that has dried, and I'm now again using pure gel food coloring. I believe this is yellow. Yeah, this is yellow. It might be like golden yellow. Just using a paintbrush to paint on these stripes. Keep in mind, you can always add more, but you can't really go back. And there were a couple of moments like that first stripe was a little too much food coloring. Alas, that last stripe on the upper left, you can tell that I added too much water. I think probably what happened was I just like tried to clean off my brush and then didn't dry it enough. But so I decided to embrace the too much gel food coloring to kind of make it all look even and similar and intentional. I was doing this just to add some extra dimension because you'll see in a minute I will actually pipe over this as well. I love these brushes. I will link these in the description of the video. And I decided to get a little cutesy here by adding some hearts. This is a pressure piped heart. It's one of my absolute favorite little detail things to do. And it is a little tricky. It's harder than it looks. So you pipe a bead, and then as you pull down for the bottom of the heart, you release the pressure on your bag at the same time. So you have less icing coming out of your bag as you start to release it. And that's what gets you that tapered look. It is a lot to coordinate at the same time. Squeezing, pulling away, releasing pressure. But they're really easy and they're just a cute little addition to a lot of things. And here I am piping these lines. Now I can tell I'm using more like a medium peak piping consistency based on how the heart's piped with that definition. And I think, okay, so I have this thing about layering lines that if you like lay especially thicker piping consistency on top of each other, then there's going to be a gap at some point in the line. And I know I was shipping these cookies to some friends, so I wanted to make sure that the lines would not break once they were dry, if that makes sense. Because if there's space in between the line, like where the lines intersect and the cookie, then if there's any pressure on that line once it's dry, because the icing is hard, then that line will break. So that's why I kind of dragged the intersection into each other. And just adding some little fun piped detail to kind of pull it all together. And that is the watermelon. I mean, the pineapple. That's a pineapple. Okay, let's talk about my orange flip-flop. It is orange because I finished piping the base. I think I flooded the base, and then I realized that I hadn't started filming, and it was my last cookie. So I scraped it, and unfortunately, that's as good as it scraped. And here I am just piping over it. But you know what? No one's gonna know. No one's gonna know. No one's gonna know. All right. This is the moment where I flooded this flip-flop and thought to myself, I really wish that I had used a thinner flood, because I'm about to do some wet on wet on a pretty large surface. And yeah, I gotta work pretty quickly here because it's gonna start crusting. Goodness, this white was also too thick. I can just tell because it's not like settling very easily. But I think one of the hallmarks of getting better at royal icing is just learning to roll with the punches, to be honest. And just working with what you've got. Sure, I could have taken all of the icing out of the bags and thinned it to a perfect consistency, but y'all ain't got time for that. Like, this process is challenging enough. I don't need to also be rebagging unless absolutely necessary. Here I'm doing just a fun little, pretty common flower look with my scribe. I'm using my smallest tipped scribe here. Choosing to do that because it will disrupt the icing the least amount, the smaller the scribe. And I am cleaning off the tip of the scribe after every pull, because if I don't, when you pull the scribe out of the icing, it does pull with it, the icing with it. So it's pulling some of that pink and that white, and if I drag that through the orange, you'll see some color at the beginning of that pull, and that is not the clean look that I'm going for. So it's annoying to have to clean it off after every pull, but it's worth it. Worth it, y'all. So the flowers weren't enough, so I decided to go in with some additional dots. Big fan of these dots. Yes, baby. And that was kind of sticking up, so I'm using a scribe to just kind of jiggle the surface of the icing ever so slightly to help it settle better. Now I have let that dry for the most part, and I'm going in here with the thong portion of the flip-flop, the strap portion. And this was a moment where, okay, so the icing here is just, it's too thick, but also I didn't apply it all that well. Now, I do find it easier to do pressure piping like this to get it to settle if you're actually using the tip of your bag as you pipe. I find that because like this icing was so thick that it kind of had already started to crust, and that's why using this scribe is not really working all that well, and you can kind of see the definition that was left, but hashtag good enough. For future though, I like to just kind of jiggle the tip of my bag as I am flooding, or as I'm like piping this kind of poofy pressure piping in a larger surface. By jiggling the tip of the bag, you're helping the icing to settle as you go, instead of piping it all and then having to go back and get the icing to settle, which can be challenging if it has already started to crust. Now, this wasn't enough, so I needed to add just a little bit more something. This is, I think this is white gel food coloring. Again, now I would recommend using edible paint, and I'll link that in the description of the video. Using a really small brush from the same set as the other brush I've already used. Just adding a little extra something. Filling in that negative space. Now I finally feel like this is done. And there we have the flip-flop, friends. Up next, we have the palm tree. Here's a case. I really don't know what was going through my head when I decided to mix, like, do 1 and 2 consistency. So I guess at this point I was just more comfortable with smaller areas of doing the 1 consistency outline and flood. And you know what? It's not a race, people. Like, do what you're comfortable with. Do what you like. Here we are. So this is a pretty thick flood. Again, it's the same consistency bag of icing that I used when flooding the stick for the popsicle. I am flooding in sections here, so I'm alternating my sections. I'm going to allow those to crust, and then I will come back in and flood what I have not flooded yet. And the reason you do that is that's what gives you definition in between flooded sections, because if you flood 2 sections next to each other that you want definition in between, you won't get the definition because the icing is thin enough that it will just kind of marry together and be best friends and join together, and you won't get that definition. So here, rare sighting of me actually piping an outline from these days. I allowed that outline to dry, but nowadays I actually prefer to, well, no, I like to let it just crust ever so slightly, but generally I think it is better to allow an outline to dry as opposed to not dry, unless you are intentionally trying to pipe it while it's still wet. And the reason to do that is if you're looking for as seamless of a look as possible, but still using an outline. And just to pop back for a second to the tree trunk, I was poking my scribe in there to pop some air bubbles. That's pretty easy to do if you spot them while the icing is still nice and wet. I always find it's helpful to use a scribe on really sharp ends to make sure you're getting a nice clean corner there. Here I am coming back in with my fan brush, my pure gel food coloring. That was very much my aesthetic for this set. I did a bunch of bright colors and then added a little extra something with the fan brush here. And in order to get that streaked look, you need to not use too much gel food coloring. So I usually will get it on the very edge of my brush, and then I might dab it a little bit on a paper towel before moving on to actually put it on the cookie. And I was just going for I wanted the streak to look. That was my goal. Here I am piping the coconuts, and I'm using for this piping consistency. It's pretty thick, and again, now I would prefer to help it settle with the tip of the bag as opposed to a scribe. I just think it works better. I use piping consistency for this. I don't know if this is a soft or medium peak, but because a small surface like this, a small shape, can very easily crater, and I really wanted as much puff and definition as I could possibly get. Allow those to dry for the most part, and then I am painting on here, realizing quite quickly that using just the gel food coloring without thinning it was much too dark, much too dark. So in a moment, I'm going to thin it with water. Play around with thinning it with water versus using, say, vodka or Everclear. Some people have extreme preferences for one or the other. Some people get pitting with one or the other as well. I find that I can use either, but when I use alcohol, when I use Everclear, the liquid evaporates so much faster while I am working with it. So I find that my little pot of color dries up just a lot faster. That's just my own personal experience. So that was the palm tree, and now we are on to the sun. Here's a trick here. This is a cookie cutter, and I'm using an edible marker. Yes, it is edible. I'll link this in the description of the video. An edible marker to trace the circle so I can get the perfect shape here, and then using my piping consistency to outline that circle first, and then I'll go in with a flood in a second. Using that scribe to help it settle. So that was pretty thick flood. Allow that to dry for the most part, and here I am again using the yellow gel food coloring and just doing these little wispy things. I have my cookie on a cookie swivel, which I will also try to remember to link in the description of the video. Love my cookie swivel. I use it very rarely, only when absolutely necessary, but this kind of design here, I really needed to always be painting at the best angle. So it's going to take me a minute, and I'll come back when I'm done. And I'm back. We are on to the sunbeams. I guess that's what you would call these. I'm using a medium peak piping consistency. That's really important for this because this kind of zigzag motion is all about keeping that texture of the zigzag. So this is really just a zigzag back and forth, and you want to make sure that you are keeping it tight, close in, so that all of the lines connect to each other. And again, super important, or very useful, I should say, that I'm using my cookie swivel, because I can only do this kind of motion from one angle. So it's really helpful to have that swivel so I can always have it at exactly the right angle. This is also going to take me a minute, so I'll come back when I'm done with this part. What I'm doing now is those sunbeams have dried, and I'm using, again, the Pure Gel food coloring just to give a little bit of like accent shading, and I'm trying to put more color toward the start and then kind of fade out towards the end of it. I'm definitely more of an abstract kind of painter. I don't go for super realistic stuff. It works for me. And that, one last little bit. That is are we done? Am I done? There we go. That is the sun. And next up is the beach ball. Using my piping consistency here to just outline the sections. Now, you know me. I'm always a big fan of just freehanding because, I don't know, I guess I'm not patient enough. But if freehanding something like this, you know, is not your jam, you can always use an edible marker to draw the shape first and then pipe over that. Just nice to have an outline. And again, this is another one where I'm outlining, I am flooding in sections. So I'm flooding every other section so that they will crust over and have definition in between the sections. This is my little tap. That's why I like to sometimes decorate, or I used to decorate always on a paper towel. And it makes that tapping a lot easier. The tapping I do to help settle icing. Sometimes I jiggle it with a scribe, and sometimes I tap it with the paper towel. That white had crusted over, which is why I then moved on to doing these colors. Now that the sections have dried and that little button in the middle dried, by the way, that was piping consistency I did there. Again, the thicker the better to prevent craters. And here I am, again, adding some of that shading I've been doing on the rest of the set with just pure gel food coloring. Orange, pink, green, nothing fancy. I think I might have thinned this one out just a tad, just a tad. But I found with what I was doing, because I was painting the same color on top of the same color, that I needed it to be pretty undiluted to get the most effect. So this is going to take me a minute again, and I'll be back when I'm done with the beach ball. And there we have the beach ball, my friends. Up next, we have sunglasses. And my arm, apparently. Again, you could use an edible marker to trace out those lenses before going through and piping them. I usually like to just live on the edge. Which then means that, you know, sometimes I've got some wonky proportions, but I'll live with it, y'all. I just live with it. And here I am. This is pure gel food coloring in black. I do regret using the pure gel food coloring though. I wish that I had used black paint because this is going to dry sticky, and I'm going to have to put some cornstarch over it, which helps, but it doesn't always get rid of all the stickiness. Now, I chose to paint these lenses because this was the only thing in this entire set that I needed to be black, and I was not going to go through the torture of coloring some black icing. Black icing just takes a lot longer to develop, and this was such a small amount that I wanted to see if I could get away with just painting it. And to be honest, I think I did. For a small space like this, it's definitely important to be using a pretty thick flood. And here I am. So these have dried, and now I am just brushing lightly some cornstarch over the top. And again, what this does is it kind of takes away the tackiness of that gel food coloring. It will slightly alter the color, so it's not going to be quite as rich of a color when you use this cornstarch, obviously, because it's white. But it does a really good job. You can also do this over dry like metallic dusts that you have painted on, because those tend to come off as well on your hands. And I'm just finishing these off with some cute little details, mixing it up, making sure that I have all of the colors on each of the sunglasses. What I was doing there with the scribe is to kind of settle the little peaks that get left when you're using a thicker consistency, because when you pull up on the bag, it leaves a little peak of icing. And here, again, using Pure Gel food coloring, and again, wishing I knew more about edible paint at this point. All about the edible paint now. I felt like it needed these outlines in hindsight. I don't know if it really did, but I committed. I went for it. So once you commit, there's really no going back. Alas. They're still cute. I love the colors so much. And one more detail, because it wasn't enough. Just painting on here these cute little dots. Sometimes I just don't know when to stop with my cookie designs, and it can be hard. You know, the really simple stuff sometimes is the hardest. And then last but not least is this big, beautiful plaque. This is the Nancy plaque by Kaleidocuts. One of my all-time faves. So versatile. And also just a really good shape to pipe. The curves are just curvy enough, but not too curvy, if you know what I mean. This is a big size. I think it might be like the 4.5 inch, might even be 5 inches. It's a big cookie, but it's the centerpiece of the cookie. And I went through a phase in my cookie designing that I always like to have a centerpiece that usually said like the theme of the set. It was usually like a plaque kind of shape. Give it a little jiggle jiggle. And here we go. So this image here is an SVG file that I purchased from Etsy. And I'm using my projector to project the image. And then I'm using piping consistency here to pipe the little popsicles. And it's important to use piping consistency because these little shapes are going to crater. What is cratering? I've said that a couple of times in this video, but haven't explained it. Cratering is totally natural with royal icing. As it dries, something in the icing weights the icing down, and so it will kind of have a crater or an indentation in the center of the icing. It happens on all royal icing. It's just on bigger surfaces like an entire cookie. You just can't tell. You can't see it. But in a smaller area, it's very pronounced. And I wanted these to be puffy, beautiful little popsicle babies. And I'm using my scribe to help settle them, but again, the way that I pipe now, I prefer to actually settle them with the tip of the bag. So this is going to take me a while, and I will come back when I'm done. Up next on this cookie is to actually pipe the lettering. The tip of my bag was just a little too big for the size of these letters. So you can see I'm kind of trying to exaggerate them as best I can. But, oh well. You live, you learn. And now going in for the cute little, tiny little nubbin sticks at the bottom. So cute. So cute. And then, because I was just going all out on this one, I wanted to do an outline on the edge of the cookie, and I alternated the colors because I guess there just wasn't enough color on this cookie. I find doing an outline like this on top of flooded icing, it is kind of hard to get the outline to really sit right at the edge of the icing, because if you do it too close in, like if it's not really at the edge, then you can kind of see the flood through the outline, which you can kind of see in that yellow that I just piped because I didn't quite make it. Oops. Now, the popsicles have dried, and I'm doing my good old shading that I've been doing in the rest of this set, and just using, this is pure gel food coloring, but I think thinned with a tiny, tiny bit of liquid to help it shade a little bit better. Be back in a hot minute, friends. And the very, very last step for this cookie is to pipe summer on top of the cute little popsicles. And yes, I'm just freehanding this, rolling with the punches here, just doing a 1 thickness, super simple pipe on top. Hello, summer! Such a fun, bright cookie. Really encompasses it all, and that's the whole set. Oh my goodness. It's just so fun and cheery. You can't help but smile looking at the set because of the colors. Oh, well, it was a pleasure walking you through this set. I really hope you try some of these yourself. Have so much fun. Enjoy. Have a sweet one, y'all.